Thank you very much and welcome everybody. Warm greetings from New Zealand. I'm speaking to you today from my adopted home country where we are now approaching summer. So we have lovely, lovely weather, but I am pleased to be able to speak with you today here during this wonderful conference. Thank you very much to the organizers of the conference for inviting me. Hopefully in the future I'll be able to visit you in person, but today we'll meet in this way virtually. As Professor Lyons said, the theme for the conference today is innovation. And I completely agree with Professor Lyons that innovation is what drives us forward. Innovation is what allows us to continue to grow. And what I want to do in my presentation today is give you some ideas of what directions we are heading in, what innovations we can expect in the near future. If my screen is showing up to you as a small screen on your computer, you can right-click on my image and choose Pin or Spotlight. And it would be wonderful if one of the organizers, one of the hosts, could do that because they're able to do this for everyone. So if one of the hosts could please right-click on my video image and select Spotlight for everyone, that way you will see my screen maximized. There we go, that's much better. There we go. Now you can see the beautiful picture of New Zealand behind me. So we have a lot of interesting developments on the horizon, some of which we are already starting to experience. What is interesting, of course, the image behind me, you can probably see what this is. It's a radar image. And a radar image, of course, allows you to see what is approaching from the distance before you can actually see it with your own eyes. However, when we are talking about innovation and the future of education, it's not enough to turn on our radars. It's the things that happen that are outside the radar, that we can't even imagine, that are going to take us by surprise the most. And I believe that especially in the coming few years, we will have a few of those surprises. COVID, of course, was one of them. But the point about it was that it spurred a number of technological developments and experiences that we now all share that put us in a better place to look towards the future, to figure out what might be coming next and how we can prepare for it. And so what I'm going to do is highlight a few of these key developments, these key areas that I believe and research seems to point to are most likely to have a major impact on what we will do as teachers, as educators, as academics, as researchers in the years to come. And one of the first ones is to do with what you see behind me on the screen here. So it's a seemingly simple question. You see a number of words, terminology on my screen, and they have something in common. And I'm wondering if you might know what it is that these terms, these words share, what they have in common. Bayesian networks, native forests, non-negative matrix vectorization, and association rule mining. Now, if you look at this and think, I have no idea what these terms have in common, I don't even know what they are, you are not alone. Most people working in education do not normally come across this type of terminology. By the way, what they actually have in common, what they share, is that they are all applied mathematical methods, math, to make sense of very large sets of data. So these are strategies or techniques that clever computer scientists and data engineers use to take a lot of data that comes in and make sense of it, kind of figure out what patterns might be hiding in the data. The other thing that these terms have in common is that it is my firm belief that in the not too distant future, all teachers, all educators will become familiar with this type of language, with this type of terminology. Not necessarily in the sense that I expect all of us to work with these types of mathematical models ourselves, but at least to have an understanding of what they are and how they might impact education. And I want to give you some practical examples of how these sets of data and the quite complex mechanism of sense making behind them, how they impact our daily lives. And I'll give you an example from healthcare, and then I'll move on to a couple of examples from the area of education. So as you are familiar with, there's been a lot of development, a lot of interest in the use of technology to enhance the delivery of healthcare. And the example I'm sharing with you here is one that actually uses data in a very clever way. You can see on the image behind me there's a few people walking around on a floor, and the floor is made up of tiles. And these tiles are not ordinary tiles. These are tiles developed by a company called Tectonic, and they are pressure sensitive. So they can sense when somebody is walking on them and when there is nobody in the room. So you can imagine this is helpful information, for example, for somebody who manages a library or a classroom or a public space, because you know how many people are using your facilities. But it goes much further than that. One of the things this company wanted to do was to register when a person who is walking on this floor might fall down and slip. And the reason why they were interested in this was because they were working specifically with providing emergency support to elderly people, especially elderly people living alone. If they are at home and they slip, obviously if they fall down and perhaps break a leg or something terrible like that, the situation could be very serious. Now, because these tiles are pressure sensitive, they know when somebody is lying on the floor, because multiple tiles will receive pressure at the same time. What the system does is that it automatically then alerts, it sends a message to maybe the building manager or a custodian to go and check on this person. But it goes much further than that still. These pressure sensitive tiles are really quite sensitive, and they can actually measure changes over time, weeks, months, maybe years, in terms of the amount of pressure that I put on the tiles as I walk. As it turns out, the way that we walk is very different from one person to the next. In fact, our gait, the way that we walk, is unique to each of us as individuals, as unique as our fingerprints and our iris. So basically, the floor tiles will know when it's you walking in the room or when it's me. But it can also sense that over time, maybe I'm starting to put a little bit more pressure on my right leg as I am walking. I might not even notice it myself, all right? It might take several months. Now, the floor tiles will register this, and the data will be sent to my GP, to my doctor, all right? And my doctor will ring me up and she will say, Hayo, I think you are going to have a problem with your right hip. I think you better come in, we take some x-rays, and let's have a look and see what's going on. And I might say to her, what are you talking about? I'm feeling fine, there's no problem. And she'll say, no, you will have a problem in the future. You don't have a problem yet, because you are starting to put too much pressure on one part of your body. So why is this interesting? Well, it's obviously good for me because I can get medical support before I actually develop a major problem. But it's actually representative of something more powerful and more important that also is going to have an impact on education. And that is that this type of technology that uses data from the real world, in this case floor tiles, it could be anything, can be used to predict what will happen. Now, if we think about education, the education system, classrooms, teaching, is a reactive system. As teachers, we do our best to obviously instruct our learners as best as we can, but it's not until we get scores on tests and exams and assignments and tasks that we see how learners are doing. And if we find that somebody's doing poorly, we can then go and provide additional support. But that is a reaction to a problem that already exists. It's like going to the doctor and saying, I have pain in my leg, can you fix it? I already have the problem. Whereas a system like this actually predicts that you are likely to have a problem in the future. Now, that is a far more powerful way of thinking about a potential problem. If we can solve it, if we can prevent it before it actually emerges, that is a lot better than trying to fix it later. So as I said, that's an example from healthcare. And I want to give you an example from education. This is an example that actually I think all of you, at least at some level, are familiar with. And it is the use of the good old learning management system. Every university in Thailand that I have visited has a learning management system. Most universities in the region around the world now use an LMS, whether it's Moodle or Blackboard or some other system. Now, actually, these systems collect a tremendous amount of data about who uses the system, where and when and for how long, and how successful they are, and what modules they access, etc., etc., etc. It's now, with the use of these applied mathematical models that I showed you earlier, that we are starting to really gain some interesting insights into the ways that learners are using the learning management system. So let me give you an example how one university used this data to enhance their educational delivery. This is a case study from a report published by the World Bank a couple of years ago. It's full of case studies. I've picked this one from the University of Maryland in the United States of America. Now, what the university there recognized at some point was that students who were getting low grades, students who were doing poorly, were the same students who were also using the learning management system of the university a lot less than students who were more successful. Now that's interesting. So just to recap, because this sort of sentence can be a little bit tricky to get your head around. Students who get good grades use the learning management system more. Students who get poor grades use the learning management system less. Now, why is that helpful? Why is that interesting? Well, because the use of the learning management system is a proxy measure, and if you haven't come across this term before, I'll explain it in a moment. It's a proxy measure of what we really are interested in, which is academic success. We want our students to have high grades. But how do I know that a student in my class is going to have high grades or low grades? Well, they need to be in my class for at least, I don't know, a semester, maybe a year, and I need to give them tests and scores, and I need to mark their assignments. And then after all those months, I will be able to figure out who are the good students and who are the ones who need more support. But by that time, all I can do is react and try and fix the problem that is already in existence. Now, however, we have a different measure. We have a proxy measure of academic success. The proxy measure is a measure, in this case, of something else, the use of the learning management system, that for some reason or other is related to what we are really interested in, which is academic success. Now, figuring out how often students use the learning management system doesn't take very long. If students still haven't started logging into and using the learning management system after 2 or 3 weeks in the beginning of the semester, they are unlikely to later on. So that means that very early on in the academic year, I can simply log in, see which of my students are engaging actively online on the LMS and which ones are not. And those that are not, I can go to, I can talk to, I can figure out what the problem is. Do they have technical issues, financial issues, pedagogical, academic issues? I can do something about the issue before it becomes a problem. So what this points to is really theme number 1, which is that data is now considered the central currency of science. We don't necessarily talk about content or even necessarily the people involved exclusively. We look to see who can obtain and harness, make good use of the data that can be collected. We are going to get more and more data from more and more different sources, which leads me to theme number 2, which is that we're already actually seeing an integration of the physical world, the real world, with the virtual world. Some people in the past have referred to this as the Internet of Things, and it's a term that you may have come across, and it's a helpful word that reminds us of the technology that is increasingly being embedded into everyday objects. So your car is now connected to the internet and can tell the garage that it needs a software update, right? Your bicycle or whatever sports equipment you have is connected and records the number of steps you take or rounds that you cycle and saves that information, which is available to you, but perhaps also to your personal trainer or to your doctor, etc. So a combination of the physical world with the virtual world, referred to as the Internet of Things. Now, the cost of developing the necessary processing and technology and sensors to embed this into everyday objects has come down so much, and the size has become so small that this can now be built into things as small as the vitamin pill that you take in the morning. And that's not an exaggeration. What you see behind me here is, as you can see, it's sitting on the edge of a coin. So it's a very, very, very small device. That is actually the Michigan Micro Mode. It's a fully functioning PC. This is not a chip. It's not a sensor. If you were able to connect a keyboard and a monitor to this, you could use it just like you're using your PC right now. That is smaller than the size of a pill that you take. And of course, this can be embedded in a pill. You swallow it, and it records all sorts of information about your physical health and transmits it to a device. But we haven't seen anything yet. In the next 2 to 5 years, I think closer to 2 years than 5 years, we are starting to see the commercial availability, the public availability of resources that make this integration between the real world, the physical world, and the virtual world more and more seamless. Rather than having to pick up a device or look at a watch or something like that, we will wear devices like these contact lenses. Several companies are creating these and are getting very close to the point of being able to commercialize these. Samsung has one, Facebook is developing one, a number of other companies. So what happens is, of course, you wear this, and as I am looking at perhaps, say, my classroom, I can see everything because I'm just looking at the environment. As I look at, for example, an individual learner, on my eyesight, it tells me things like the name of that student. It tells me their GPA. It tells me if that student has had any particular problems in my class before, etc. So you can see how this can really enhance our ability to personalize our education. Here's another example that's also very close to coming to production. Now, here are a couple more examples that I really like because these are actually in use right now. And these headsets are used in usually specialized domains like healthcare or industrial applications. But they are, as I said, they are in use as we speak. And I believe that as the costs are coming down very quickly, that these types of devices will start to enter the educational world sooner rather than later. And I'm talking about a small number of years at most. So the examples I'm showing you here now are all from a report that you can see on your screen, published by Games for Change. The link is at the bottom of the screen, about the use of XR. And if you're not familiar with this term, XR, or extended reality, is the combination of reality, physical reality, virtual reality, where you are completely immersed in another world, and augmented reality, where, for example, you're looking through your phone at an object and you see information about what you are looking at. And it's a great report, and it's got lots of wonderful examples. I'll share with you a couple. Before I forget to say, at the end of the presentation, I will share with you the presentation files. So I will give you a link later, and you can download the presentation as a PDF and look up some of these references if you want to find out some more information. So the one that we just looked at, which I actually forgot to talk about, this one is from healthcare, as you can tell. This is a pre-operative, like prior to going into surgery, investigation. So the medical doctor is preparing for a surgery, and in addition to their charts and their sheets and whatever notes that they have, he can see previous information such as x-rays that have been taken or blood sample data, etc., from this patient as he is interacting with this person. And it's been shown that this is leading to a significant reduction in problems during operations, especially human error, with doctors forgetting one of the many pieces of information I need to remember about a patient. Here's another one, in some ways very simple, but actually life-saving invention. This one from an industrial application. You can see this gentleman here is wearing another type of headset. He works in a factory, which are very dangerous environments. In fact, factory floors are, in the United States at least, the most dangerous work environment after anything to do with vehicles. And for health and safety purposes, as he walks around the factory floor, he is prompted by the computer system to take a number of safety checks. So, for example, check that the valve is closed for safety. Take a photo of the valve being closed. Don't just quickly look at it. No, take a photo and submit it for approval either by a computer or a supervisor or whatever. And, well, again, studies are showing that this is greatly reducing human error and casualties and injuries as a result. The final example I want to show you is a really powerful one, because it's not just medical or it's actually more to do with connecting with other people at a human level. Because we talk a lot about technology and sort of quite objective, terms, data, and it's all a little bit impersonal. But of course, technology can also be used to enhance connections, and I'll talk about that a little bit more towards the end of the presentation. But here's a great example. This is an augmented reality app designed by MIT in the United States that tries to have the person using the application experience what it's like for someone who is about to lose their vision. So if you have a degenerative eye disease, and a lot of people, of course, especially as societies get older, are progressively, slowly losing their eyesight or having certain diseases, it can be difficult for family members and friends and other people to kind of feel what that is like. And so this application gives you a sense of what happens to that person. A similar sort of application was developed at Stanford University in California to give people a sense of what it's like to be older. And most of us actually, it's very hard to imagine what it would be like to live on the streets. And what they found was that not only did it really give the participants in their studies a much greater sense of understanding, but also really increased their sense of empathy, their sense of connection with other people. And that was a long-term effect. So you can see that technology can be used for very, very positive uses. So that leads me to the third main theme. After data and the connection of physical reality and virtual reality, the third one is about the elephant in the room. Not the Thai elephant, this is the global elephant, and it's to do with artificial intelligence, which of course we're all aware of is becoming more and more apparent. It's been around for a very long time. All of us here have probably heard of artificial intelligence for many, many years, but it's now really starting to become available and usable by people who are not computer scientists or engineers. So now what you can do with artificial intelligence, and the reason why I came up with this picture, was you can go to a website like openai.org, and you can type in the words, give me an image that shows an elephant in a room and make it look artistic. That's what the computer comes up with. And it's not that the computer found that image somewhere on the internet. No, the computer made that image in seconds, right? So you just give it some keywords, an elephant in a room, artistic, painting, something like that, and this is what you get. The famous magazine, The Economist, which has been around for a very long time, 150 years I think, had a special issue a few months ago on artificial intelligence. And, well, you can guess who designed the cover of that magazine, can't you? The magazine cover was designed by AI. All the magazine editors did was type in a number of keywords and ask the computer to generate the message. It's starting to really produce results that we did not think were possible even recently. And it's starting to produce results that are in areas, in disciplines that we thought it would never be able to conquer. We can all sort of understand how a computer can very quickly search through millions of images and find something or whatever, but ask your computer to write a poem for you, and if it comes up with something as beautiful as this, or if you ask the computer to make a painting for you or create some sort of image, create art, and it produces something that if you gave it to someone else without telling them it was produced by a computer, they would say, hey, that's beautiful, that's gorgeous. Music, artworks, sculptures, 3D sculpting, very interesting areas. But of course, what we're interested in here is to try and understand what impact these technologies, because of course artificial intelligence is a vast range of technologies, how that's going to impact our pedagogy. What do these things mean for us as teachers? So what I want to do is give you some examples from my discipline, which is language education, right? So I know that many of you are working in other areas of education, but I think you will end up, if you very soon, needing more questions. So in our field, of course, we deal a lot with teaching students how to write. And so one of the questions that we now need to answer for ourselves as instructors, as teachers, is, are we okay, are we happy for our students to use automated writing evaluation software? Because students can now simply go online, submit their essay, and the software will evaluate it, and it will give them specific recommendations for how it can be improved and so on. And you might say, well, okay, that seems okay, right? That seems instructional, that seems pedagogically meaningful. Okay, how about the use of automated corrective feedback software? So corrective feedback is where not only do I kind of help you to make your writing better, I also point out to you when and where you make mistakes and what types of mistakes they are, and I also give you specific suggestions for how you could further improve your skill in certain areas. I showed the example of Grammarly because everybody knows Grammarly, but there are many more applications like this, including some smaller university-driven ones that are very, very smart. So again, you might say, well, that's a tool that learners use as they, develop their writing, and I guess maybe that's okay. All right, let's take it one step further. Would you be happy for your students to use machine translation? Right? So this is where you type in a text, and Google Translate, of course, is an example that we're all familiar with, but again, there are more specialized applications available as well. And I say, translate this for me into Chinese. And especially in the last 18 to 24 months, the quality of these translations has improved dramatically, to the point where it's often difficult to tell whether the translation was written by a native speaker or not. So it's more than usable now in most situations, more than usable, right? So as a teacher, as a language professor, am I okay with that? Because now all the students is writing is maybe English or Thai or their native language, and they're not even producing the target language anymore at all. I'm not going to answer the question, but it's certainly one that a lot of teachers are grappling with. And this is only going to increase if you look at the data on machine translation. Well, at the moment, or last year, 2021, this was an $800 million industry, as you can see down there. But by 2030, this is expected to be a $7.5 billion industry, basically meaning machine translation is going to be incorporated into global communication at every possible level, commercial, personal, etc. All right, let's take it one step further, shall we? Let's say that I'm okay with my students using machine translation. At least they're still writing the original text, right? Wrong. Because with GPT-3, designed by Google and made available through open source website where you can download the API if you want to play with it, and we're doing some research on this at the moment at my university. Well, GPT-3 is an intelligent text generator. What does that mean? Well, it means that I can just give it some text and it can produce, it can compose almost anything. It can create poetry, quite convincing, quite beautiful poetry. It can write computer code, it can translate text, it can do summaries of academic articles. It can correct grammar, power chatbots, and more. And I've played with this for quite some time, and the quality of what it puts out is very impressive. I won't read out these examples, but if you do look at the presentation later, I recommend you have a close look at these slides here now, because they are actually very funny. The computer is able to actually take a prompt that it's given and create a very, very interesting and convincing response to it. So this leads to some deep pedagogical questioning on the part of us as educators. And the kinds of questions that I think a lot of teachers need to grapple with are, first and foremost, well, what are the advantages of new technologies as they emerge? What are the affordances? What are the potential benefits for what we want to achieve in our education? and what you want to achieve in your education. That's your objective. You know, that might be different from your university and my university and one student and another student. But we need to understand the impact that technology can have on what it is we want to achieve, and what are the drawbacks as well, right? Having machine translation or GPT-3 as a text generator, yeah, that can have real advantages in real life contexts. But if you're trying to teach someone how to write a convincing essay, they of course completely defeat the purpose, and your student will never learn to be able to create a convincing essay or whatever it may be by themselves. So we need to be very insightful and carefully consider the impact of new technologies. How are we going to prepare ourselves? I think it's safe to say that most of us here are not computer scientists. We're not data engineers. We're not necessarily particularly, technologically advanced. So how do we prepare ourselves for this? How do we keep on top of what's out there? Well, I mean, obviously attending conferences such as this one and continuing your professional development is one way, but also talking to your colleagues, thinking about it, reflecting on the implications is going to take up a bigger and bigger part of our jobs. And of course, related to that, finally, how will we prepare our students, right? I mean, just telling your students, you should never ever use Google Translate in our language class. Yeah, well, good luck with that. Because as soon as you turn around, what are they doing? They're going to Google Translate. So it's better to teach them when it's okay to use Google Translate and when it's better not to, right? So the final thing I want to say before I open it up to some Q&A is, I think, the fourth and final theme I want to address, which is to do with the human aspect of technology. We've talked about data and augmented reality and artificial intelligence, and all of that is quite far removed from the human element in learning. So what do I mean by that? Well, without going into detail, what you see here is the famous triangle of self-determination theory. And self-determination theory, for those of you who are not familiar, is a universal theory of human motivation. It tries to explain why humans are motivated to do certain things, like learn a new subject, for example, and why sometimes they are not. I'm really summarizing a very long history of research here in a very short amount of time, but the three kind of key components of self-determination theory are that learners, people in general, are more likely to be motivated if they experience a sense of autonomy, if I feel that I have some control over what's going on, if I feel competent, if I can see that I'm making some progress, and if I have a sense of relatedness. So what do we mean by relatedness? Well, relatedness is the need, the desire that we have to feel connected to other people, right? We need to feel cared for, and we need to feel that we can care for others. This is one of the most, human aspects of learning, of our motivation, of what drives us. And so relatedness and technology are not usually thought of as being connected. But actually they can be, and increasingly people are starting to come up with really clever ways in which they can be, and perhaps should be, related to each other. Now, again, something I'm not going to talk about in detail, but you can look this up later, but we actually have several decades, at least half a century actually, of research on what is more likely to lead to learners or people experiencing a sense of relatedness in an environment, and what is likely to learners experiencing a lack of relatedness. And to give you one or two quick examples, if I am in a classroom or an online environment or any situation where I have an opportunity to support others and where I have a chance to be supported by perhaps my classmates, I am much more likely to experience a sense of relatedness. And I am therefore much more likely to be motivated to learn in that environment, right? Similarly, if I'm in an environment where the teacher makes me feel alienated, or where the school, is extremely competitive and I feel everything is divisive and I feel lonely, I am not going to experience relatedness and I'm not going to be motivated. So what does this have to do with technology? Well, it's related specifically to an area that I think is going to become increasingly important in coming years, and that's only very recently started to emerge, and that is the notion of designing instruction, education, pedagogy for digital well-being, right? So what does that mean? Well, we are experiencing in our lives a lot of digital disarray, as Mark Pegram and Aga Palalas call it. Things like being distracted by the devices that we are constantly interacting with, that actually remove us from people around us, this constant kind of checking our screens. 3 hours and 15 minutes is now the average daily smartphone use in the United States of America. That's a lot. If you pick up your phone during this presentation to check your messages, did you know that you have a 50% chance that you will pick up your phone again within 3 minutes? Right? This is how addictive these devices are. And even worse, if you're sitting here listening to this presentation or doing anything in your life, and you have your phone or tablet on your desk, and you're not even looking at it, you're not touching it, actually that reduces your cognitive capacity, your ability to concentrate by 10%. Why? Because our brains see the device and our brain is constantly expecting that a message will come in, or that we have to respond to someone or do something. So our brain is deciding part of its effort is going to be, directed to this phone, even though I don't want to use it at all. So digital distraction leading to something in the literature called continuous partial attention. We're never able to fully concentrate on any one thing. And we see this in particular in our learners growing up with TikTok and YouTube Shorts, etc. But also, of course, increasingly in ourselves. I don't need to tell you about other downsides of technology, such as digital disorder, the increasing circulation of misinformation and disinformation and fake news, etc. It's making it really hard to know what is even true. What can we believe? And it's leading to something called digital disconnection. This sense that we are never really fully in relation with our surroundings, with our teachers, with our colleagues, with our learners, because we're never fully present. So theme number 4, final theme, digital well-being, designing for digital well-being, or also referred to as a new field, a new discipline called positive computing. A field dedicated to the design and development of technology that actually supports well-being and human potential, that actually says, let's not start from the technology. Let's not just see how many chips we can put into one device. No, let's start with the human. How can we increase relatedness? How can we give people opportunities to connect with each other, support each other, etc. Right? How can we enhance well-being and then design the technology around that? For many, many years, we've gone the technology route, and now we're starting to recognize, no, we have to bring it back to the starting point, which is us as human beings. So I'm hopeful, I'm hopeful that we are starting to see greater awareness and the development of better, more human-focused technologies. This is a very good book, by the way. If you want the reference, it'll be on the PowerPoint that I'll share with you in a moment on this topic that came out a couple of years ago that I can highly recommend. As I said, the presentation is on my website. If you need to type that, this Innovation in Teaching, word.org. And if you go there, you can read my articles and books and things like that. But add the /future, it will take you straight to today's presentation. And finally, last thing I want to say is, do keep in touch. If you have questions afterwards that we don't get to during the Q&A now, you're very welcome to reach out to me online or Katalk or whatever program you might be using. Love to hear from you. So thank you so much for your attention, and I look forward to the Q&A.
Yeah, hi, good morning, everyone. Again, if you have any questions, that was a very informative, Dr. Reinders. Just to shout out, I would like to thank you because you're one of my literature when I did my write-up in my paper in language learning analytics. That's the first time I encountered your name. Thank you
All
very
right.
much. All right. If you have any question with the keynote speaker, kindly key into the chat box. Okay, so I think I'm going to throw the first question. Do you think?
Joma.
Oh yes, Ajahn.
Yeah. I would like to share idea with the professor, the keynote speaker. I understand the pedagogy that to present to our participant. My student want to talk English language, but they are afraid of mistake to speak English language, but they know the answer. They want to talk, they know the answer, but they afraid of the English language and the grammar. How can we solve this problem? That we want the student to share the idea or to answer the question, but they don't want to speak so much because they're afraid of the grammar, they're afraid of the mistakes. How can we use the pedagogy that to solve this problem for the student? Thank you.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I think it's a great example of an area where technology can actually have a really positive impact on learners' well-being. And so let me give you an example from my own experience, from my own research, and that is the use of digital games. Now, as you know, learners, well, people in general these days, but certainly our learners spend a lot of time in online environments and in game environments and online role-playing games, etc. And in a lot of these environments, there are many other people who you can communicate with, either via text chat or via spoken chat. And in the various studies that I've done, we had our students communicate with other players, and we said, well, you can even play computer games in our English class if you like. However, there's only one rule. If you are going to play computer games in our class, you have to log in to the international server. You're not allowed to log into the Thai server or the Filipino server or whatever. And so what happens is, of course, the language franca is English. And they want to communicate because they want to play the game, but also, and this is a really key point, they are simply playing and they are an avatar, a character in a game. They don't see themselves as themselves, and so they don't mind as much if they make a mistake. And so what we found in our study was that learners who were encouraged to communicate using digital games had a much higher willingness to communicate and a much lower level of anxiety about communicating in English. So I think it's a really good example of how technology can actually enhance learner well-being. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you very much, Ajahn Damrong. Are there any more questions?
I have a question, and I'm not playing that on. We're sharing her computer. Hayo, welcome. It's nice to see you every time. The question that I have is one of time. You're saying that technology will take a greater role in life and people need to spend more time talking about it, discussing about it, deciding what to do. But in order to give time to computing or technology, they may have to give up time somewhere else. And the somewhere else where they give up time is already full and cannot be reduced. In particular, I'm thinking of what I call the craze for weekly class plans or daily class plans and so on. You have to create something which you're going to teach. And so as you divert your energies away from that side of things, and move it towards technology, is there going to be a problem with people either working too much or not performing their job adequately?
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, I knew you were going to ask a question, so I'm very pleased that you did. So yeah, you're absolutely right, and this is the fine balance between, on the one hand, maintaining your equilibrium, your stasis, and your sanity and your current well-being, while also exploring new opportunities and figuring out how this digital well-being can be brought into the equation without it being at the expense of our, shall we say, non-digital, our analog well-being. I think there's one element here that we're only just starting to experience, and so it's slightly early days, but especially in the medium term, maybe already in the short term, we'll see that a lot of our especially the more tedious aspects of our work as educators will be increasingly handled by technology. Now, I want to give you a quick example from our research lab at Kanda University in Japan, where I work as an adjunct professor. We have an artificial intelligence chatbot that is sitting in the staff room. And this chatbot is very clever because you can have conversations with her. We decided to call her Brenda, since she's a female. She's very nice, and she's also very clever. So you can give her, for example, you can give her information. Say, make a lesson plan for me based on the information that I give you, and she will do that, and she'll do a pretty good job, actually. Now, a lot of the teachers in our university, of course, initially when you tell them that, they say, well, this is terrible because it's going to take my job. Well, no, it's not, because although it's pretty good, it's never going to be as original and innovative and knowledgeable about the students at a personal human level as you are. What it can do, and what it is now technologically able to do, is, for example, take your lesson plan that you developed and make 20 slightly different versions of it for each of the students in your class. So let's say you want to do a small project or something and you want to give people a slightly different role. Well, writing out 20 different sets of instructions, very similar but slightly different instructions, is a very time-consuming and perhaps slightly boring part of our jobs. If that part of it can be handled by artificial intelligence, that would be great, because it frees up time for me to focus on what I can actually contribute as a human teacher. So I think we're at this sort of interesting stage where the technology is developing to a point where we can now actually, all of us can see practical examples and advantages of the technology that 5 years ago were simply not there yet. Translation 5 years ago was just not good enough. Now it is. And so I think we're at a very, very, at a tipping point when it comes to especially artificial intelligence, and where we hopefully will start to see some payback, some return, and be able to delegate some of our time away from ourselves, and let some of the more tedious aspects of our roles be handled by the computer. He said, hopefully.
Can I just make an additional comment, which is that while it is true, I agree entirely with Professor Hayo, I also think that people have one great skill, and that is that they are adaptable. And they will learn to change with changes that occur around. So if there are, just imagine if we lost all the bus drivers because we now have automatic buses, or if we lose all of the truck drivers, that's going to change the world considerably. And it's quite possible that it will happen. And this happened with horse drivers at the beginning of the 20th century. So we will be okay in the long run.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. One last question, sir, if you mind. Do you think we as human beings can cope with the advancement of technology in terms of pedagogy and delivery of instructions?
Yes, I think we can, partly because we are at a point where we don't have a choice anymore, so we will have to, but that's a slightly cynical answer. The more positive answer that we've actually shown, as Professor Lyons said, we've been shown to be extremely adaptable. And so, let's not forget when the internet first emerged in the mid-1990s, a lot of people said, okay, well, I'm a teacher, I'm no longer needed, because in 5 years' time, everything that is available in the world is going to be accessible to my students, on a computer. But of course, that wasn't the full story. Mobile technologies did something similar for a while. People said, wow, people can now literally go anywhere, anytime, and access knowledge and connect with other people. And so why do we need educational structures anymore? Well, and of course, we all know how that turned out. And so, we as a profession, we kind of adapt. And this is the key point, we learn to recognize the drawbacks, the challenges, the issues, the problems, and we learn, sometimes very slowly, but still we learn to integrate the positive. And we work towards an integration that leads to hopefully greater well-being for all of us, because that's the ultimate aim of education, isn't it? Is to enhance society's well-being.
Okay.